Okay, good morning, afternoon, evening, night, whatever time you may be watching this. This is the Parliamentary Procedure Forum that was presented recently at our TO Service Safari. If you made it, great. If you didn't, that's fine as well. You missed out, but be happy that we're having this. My name is Michael Chappell. I'm the Division 40 East Lieutenant Governor here in the great state of Oklahoma, and I'm also the chairman of the Standing Committee on Regulations, Elections, and Credentials. Um, in case you're unfamiliar with this committee, you'll see a lot of us during HOD, but we're primarily charged with the governing documents of the district, the bylaws, codes, and of course, enforcing parliamentary procedure, not only at our district board meetings, but at the House of Delegates. So if you are a future or prospective delegate, please tune in. Take notes if you will. I would highly encourage that you take notes throughout this, and we'll go ahead and get started. So the principal standard we use in Key Club and most organizations is going to be Robert's Rules of Order. It's like I said, it's pretty common and customary. But what are parliamentary procedures? It's a set of rules for conducting businesses at meetings and public gatherings, and it's important because it ensures democratic rule, the protection of rights, flexibility, and a fair hearing for everyone. I would argue that, at least in Robert's Rules of Order's case, that as it pertains to democratic rule, this process is best for making sure that everyone's voice is heard, and the steps within this standard of parliamentary procedure do just that. So we'll move on and get into it. The basic motion procedure of Robert's Rules of Order. There are 5, okay? And they're very simple. The first thing you have to do is be recognized by the chair. So if you have a motion, and assuming that you're in person, for the duration of this presentation, let's just assume you're in person. All you have to do is raise your hand. And after you've raised your hand, you must be recognized by the chair. We'll call you John Doe for right now. John Doe raises his hand, and the chairperson recognizes John Doe. So now that John Doe has been recognized, it's time for them to make a motion. Example, I move that this forum move on, okay? I do want to make a point that when you make your motion, stick to I move. Don't use anything improper like I make a motion or motion hereunto therefore, anything outlandish. Just stick to I move. So John Doe says I move that this forum continue, and you move on to your third step, getting a second. Getting a second is as simple as just being recognized. It only takes one other person to raise their hand. So again, John Doe, I move that this forum be continued. Someone raises their hand. You don't have to ask to raise your hand, just throw it up there, and the chair will make notes to the secretary that you were the one who seconded it. After you've given your second, you move on to step 4 and discussion and amending. So after John Doe has made his motion, they have acquired their second. The chair will return to John Doe as the principal mover to give a brief discussion of his or her motion. So for example, if I'm John Doe and I move that this forum be continued, the chair will recognize me again for discussion, and I'll say, I think that Michael Chappell's a pretty long-winded kiddo, so we should move on. At that point, other members present will be allowed to ask whatever questions they have, and as you'll see there, give whatever amendments they have as well. We'll get into that. It's pretty, not a hairy process, but it needs additional looking into at least step 4. So assuming that, no one's been a pain and amended stuff, et cetera, discussion is ended and you'll move on to voting. In voting, there are multiple steps. We'll also get to that in another slide. But just to recap, John Doe raises his hand. They're recognized by the chair. John Doe gives their motion. The motion acquires a second. They move on to discussion. Whatever discussion or amendment is to be had, after that, voting will take place. Okay. So we will move on. Making your motion. Always state a motion affirmatively. I can understand that public speaking can be a pretty daunting task, but when you make your motion, say it clearly. I know from personal experience, this will limit the amount of headache you have to have later on for your explanation. So just make sure you're sitting clearly and avoid personalities and stay in your subject. Avoiding personalities, that's very important. This is why you always direct your question and or your motion to the chair. Um, Commonly, it's for the purposes of avoiding any conflict. In the case that I say, well, the lieutenant governor, I think is wrong. You always want to say Madam Governor or Mr. Governor. I think that so and so is wrong. Always just address your chair, whoever's presiding. And of course, as you'll see there, stay in your subject. Again, to reduce headache, it can become a pretty arduous process. As you'll see there, another member will second your motion like we discussed, or the chairman will call for a second. If there is no second, your motion fails, okay? So irregardless, if there are 300 people in a room and no one raises their hand, it fails. But even if one person were to raise their hand, that is a second and it moves on, okay? The point is that at least someone has to be, to some degree, in agreement with whatever you're moving. So after you've made your motion, you're going to expand on your motion. Again, this is that discussion / amendment period we talked about, step 4. The time for you to speak in favor of your motion is at this point in time. The mover is always allowed to speak first, like we said. All comments and debate must be directed to the chairman, like we said. No member can speak twice to the same issue until everyone else wishing to speak has spoken to it once. And this goes back to that ensuring that democratic right. If you have already given your 2 cents on an issue, the chairman is going to move on to the next person to say what they have to say and then come back to you. It would be kind of shortcutting other members present if the chairperson repeatedly went back to you. So like I said, it's just to make sure that everyone's voice is heard. After that's done, they'll come back to you. So secondary motions, it's a very interesting topic, but if you're not doing a main motion, right? So there's main motions and there's secondary motions. Main motions being you're just generally moving something, but a secondary motion is a motion that typically applies to the item. So for example, you have a motion to table. This is to put an issue for consideration aside until such a time as the board would like to revisit. You can take from the table for reconsideration by the membership. So for example, if the motion was to move this forum along, if you said, Madam Chairperson, I move that we table this item, it's just a statement of saying, I think we should look at this at another time. And in that discussion period, you might say, this is taking long, et cetera, et cetera. Your other secondary motions, one, for example, is a motion to postpone indefinitely. Sorry, definitely, there's a difference. So this is used to end debate and postpone a motion to a certain later time. If you guys in your club or in your district have been talking about a certain issue for the longest time, you want to end that debate so as to get on with other items, you can motion to postpone definitely. And as you'll see there, that motion will be considered at a later time. Now, this is where I said there's a difference between definitely and indefinitely. So you'll see that motion to postpone indefinitely is used in the attempt to kill a motion. So whereas postposing definitely just moves a motion to another time in your agenda, a motion to postpone indefinitely means I don't want to hear this motion anymore, and it is effectively killing that motion. In later slides, we'll talk about what's needed for this type of motion to go through, but that's its general exegesis. And then other secondary motions, as we'll see there, amending, used to change the main motion. Amendments can be given in that 4th step of the basic motion procedure during discussion. And like I said, other slides will show you the process by which an amendment to a motion can be passed. And then a previous question used to end debate. I'll say from personal experience, we use this a lot during our summer board back in July. When you move to the previous question, that's also another way to end debate. Whereas a motion to postpone definitely, you're moving that discussion to a later time. Moving a previous question just ends debate right there. You're not killing it. You're just ending the debate so you can go through the rest of the steps for that motion. So the that's not English, 5 voting methods, as we previously said. This is the 5th step of the basic motion procedure. The most common is going to be the voice. So the chairperson asks those in favor to say aye, those opposed to say no or nay. It's your discretion, and any member may move for an exact count. So again, commonly, the chair will say, all those in favor say aye, aye. All those in favor say nay. Hopefully your motion doesn't get any nays, but it happens. And as you'll see there, any member may move for an exact count. And that leads me to the next point, a division. Members may raise their hands or stand, and it does not require a count unless the chairman so desires. So if in your voice call, any member thinks that there was, it's pretty balanced ayes, pretty balanced nays, there's not really a defined concrete line as to whether or not the motion passed via voting. A member can yell division or move for an exact count. Again, as you'll see there, it does not require a count unless the chairperson desires. The other form is ballot. Members write their vote on a slip of paper. This ensures secrecy. Ballots are typically reserved for more items of sensitivity, i.e. electing officers, things of that matter. I think you'll be able to, tell whenever each of these are necessary. And then the other ones, general consent, agreement shown by silence. However, if one member says, I object, the item must be put to a vote. So general consent just means that everyone is on the same page. If there's, again, silence is in other organizations, like in Congress, this is called unanimous consent. It's just unilateral consensus concerning your motion. But again, if one member says, I object, the item must be put to a vote. And then the last one, roll call. Each member answers yes or no as his or her name is called. This method is used when a record of each person's vote is required. You'll see there at the bottom, do not be that person that calls roll call. So again, if in your voice vote, you didn't think that it was a pretty defined line as to where the votes were, one person may yell division, one person may move for a roll call. And in a roll call, as you'll see, as I already covered, that's literally going down the roster of each name. So for example, Lieutenant Governor John, aye. Lieutenant Governor Jane, aye. Lieutenant Governor Sue, aye, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Let me reiterate, do not be that person that calls roll call for the heck of it, right? It's a burdensome, arduous process, but if you wholly believe that if in the voice vote, no definition was made, then this is an effective way of getting your concrete votes. So we've basically covered the 5 steps there. We're going to move on to interruptions. These are very, very vital as it pertains to, again, that democracy and right of each person in discussion. So you may interrupt a speaker for these reasons only, the speaker being the chairperson or the principal mover giving discussion. A point of order. So a point of order is usually going to be given when there's been an infraction concerning the parliamentary procedure. So for example, if a lieutenant governor or any person, I'm sorry, I keep saying that, any person was recognized to speak and they didn't state their, for example, name or division, what you could yell point of order. When we have our district board meetings and a lieutenant governor is recognized, if they stand and start speaking without having given their name and division, typically a rec member or myself will yell, point of order, please state your name and or division, et cetera, okay? Point of information. Anyone can yell this, obviously. Point of informations are typically asked when a member present needs more information concerning the motion. So for example, going back to our previous example, if I wanted this forum to be continued, at any time I could say point of information, did we already vote on this, et cetera, et cetera. It's just a motion, not a motion, just asking for clarification on something. Point of personal privilege. Commonly, it's going to be things like, can I go to the restroom? It's kind of cold in here. Can we, make it warmer? Can I go get some water? Things that are just pertaining to your person. And then a point of parliamentary inquiry. Those are things that typically pertain to the process of parliamentary procedure. So, whereas a point of order is an infraction in procedure, a point of parliamentary inquiry is a question concerning the procedure. So, for example, and commonly it'll just be asking the chairperson um, for more guidance concerning the manner in which something should be continued with, how should we go about this, did we already, et cetera, as it pertains to parliamentary steps. That can be very iffy, but it's very effective at times. So those are interruptions. If you have your phones with you while you're watching this, or if you're on your phone, I would encourage you to either take a picture or screenshot this. This is the overall parliamentary procedure slides concerning the motions, main motions, secondary motions, what you say, whether you need a second or not, whether or not, excuse me, it's debatable, whether or not it's amendable, what sort of vote is required, and if it can or cannot be reconsidered. So that's the first one. As you'll see, you've got your main motion to amend, to vote, to reconsider, postpone, in debate, look into motion further, et cetera, et cetera. This is that second slide, continued, continuing to adjourn a meeting, to nominate, to close nominations, intermission, request information. That's also called point of information, ding, ding, ding. Complain about noise, heat, room. Now that says I rise to a question of privilege. You can just say point of personal privilege. Protest a breach of rules or conduct. That's a point of order. And to be excused. I move that I be excused from, et cetera, et cetera. Now I do want to make mention that if you look over to your right and see, what things need a second, what things don't, what sort of vote is needed, pay close attention to that. Everything in Robert's rules is always going to tie into not only the time efficiency of the matter, but how it pertains to everyone concerning democratic rule. That's the whole point of Robert's rules, okay? So I hope you took a picture of this slide. If you didn't, here is the, well, that's not it. Here is the first slide again, if you didn't get it. And here is the second slide again. Now, this is a mock discussion. If you came to the TO Service Safari Parliamentary Procedures Forum, you participated in our mock discussion. If you're going to be presenting this in your clubs, or if you'd like to participate it, here again are the steps with additional detail. In our forum, we argued whether or not the animal depicted on the screen was a crocodile or an alligator. So again, we'll use that example. Step one, be recognized by the chair. So I'm going to raise my hand. The chairperson will say, Lieutenant Governor Michael Chappell, you are recognized. Step two, I'll make my motion. We have Karina, she's our illustrious governor. I'll say, Madam Governor, I move that the animal depicted on the screen be considered a crocodile. So once that's done, I'll sit down. The chairperson, or in this example, our governor, she'll either look for a second or someone will have already immediately raised their hand. So someone who raised their hands, the chairperson being the governor will say, seconded by John Jane Doe. The secretary will note that. Step four, Governor Patel will then recognize me again and say, Lieutenant Governor Michael Chappell, you are recognized to present your motion. At which point I would stand up and say, Division 40 East, Michael Chappell, or Michael Chappell Division 40 East, it's been a good time. At that point, I stand up and say that given the length of the snout of the animal and what I know of the anatomical differences between a crocodile and an alligator, I think I can safely deduce and conclude the fact that the animal depicted on the screen is a crocodile. Madam Governor, that concludes my discussion. After that point, any members present can raise their hand to present for questions. Members present can raise their hand to present amendments. I don't really think you'd have to amend the fact that I believe that this is a crocodile, but you'd be surprised, ... So step 4, like I said, discussion. Principal introducer speaks first. The principal mover always speaks first, okay? So if you're a chairperson, if you're presiding, always go back to the principal mover. And then step 5, voting. Governor Patel would say, okay, this concludes discussion. We'll move to a voice vote. All those in favor of considering the animal depicted a crocodile, say aye. Aye, 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 aye. La, 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 la. Hopefully there are no nays. You could get them. If your votes are majority, great. The animal on the screen is a crocodile, and you move on to your next item. Okay. Now, like I said, if you took pictures of those slides back there, there are some motions that can be reconsidered. There are some motions that cannot be reconsidered. For the sake of the limited complexity of this presentation, we won't get into them. I didn't want to make this super long. There are a myriad of videos you can watch on too many platforms to name that delve into those certain examples. But this is the common form of a main motion that will typically happen within your clubs. Should any disputes be made, step 4 is always the most effective way. And as the chairperson, sometimes it's going to be up to you to maintain order. If you're a kiddo keen on your parliamentary procedure, you can always use or shout point of order to even do that. So not only in the sense of democracy is everyone involved, but everyone is duly held accountable and keeping everyone to the same standard of expectation. So that is that. You can ask me questions through the screen, so never mind that one. This is our contact at the forum. This was presented by myself and Lieutenant Governor Ely Lamb of Division 18S. I would say he did an outstanding job. Moreover, the slides presented and created were by Veranda Quaka, Division 25 West. Big kudos, hand clap, trophy, crown to Veranda. She does a superb job. Ely does too. The rest of the committee and our advisors, they do superbly. We're all here to serve you, the clubs, the district, with anything you need. If you'd like these slides, go ahead and just email me as my email up there, ltg40e@gmail.com. If you have any ideas concerning bylaw amendments, there is a process for that. And, I've been talking a lot about democracy and Robert's Rules of Orders, but the House of Delegates is our highest authoritative body in our district. And we want everyone to have the opportunity to affect the operation and the continuity of the district to which we all belong. So with that, thank you for coming to this mini forum presentation. I'm sorry for being so long-winded. I hope you take this back to your clubs. Next time, you won't have such long debates over frivolous or trivial questions. You'll be able to use Robert's Rules of Order. So with that, thanks again. And I don't know, try and stay alive. It's 2020. All right, adios.